Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, as a chicken processing plant closes due to a lack of water, calls for food producers to be a higher priority.
We have to prioritise both the welfare of birds and food supply. We need to get to a place where that gets the priority access for water.
Let's start, though, with the price of chocolate, which, as I'm sure you've noticed, has been increasing. Well, to give farmers in West Africa a future, retail prices should stay high, even if global cocoa prices fall. That's the call to the industry from the CEO of Tony's Chocolonely, Douglas Lamont, on this week's edition of the Food Programme. In the last 18 months, the price of cocoa on the futures market has seen record-breaking highs, followed by a crash. Lamont argues that if the price of bars in UK supermarkets stays relatively high, it'll reflect the true cost of cocoa farming.
I think if the farm gate price for the farmer settles on a market price of around 4,000, that enables a better investment in the farmer, getting them closer to living income prices, because ultimately they have been dramatically underinvested in, and as a result, when a farmer is underpaid, they don't invest in their farm, they don't invest in productivity, they don't invest in disease management, and unfortunately, even worse, in this scenario, they have to ask their children to work on the farm rather than be able to hire workers to do some of that work. And you end up with the situation we've got, which is 1.5 million in child labour in West Africa. I think this crisis gives us an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to say, let's invest more consistently in the farmer to avoid these crazy spikes. Because yes, the climate events are going to become more common, but I would argue that the yield dipped around 30% 2 seasons in a row. I would argue if there had been good farm management, because the farmers had a little more money in their pocket to do that, yields would have been down, but they wouldn't have been down 30%. The world market price wouldn't have done what it done, and that's cost chocolate companies billions. So my call to CFOs of the big chocolate companies is, yes, there's a moral argument, but there's a very, very clear economic argument for change. Invest more consistently in the farmer over the time to avoid these crazy spikes in the market.
Douglas Lamont, and you can hear Dan Saladino's full report on the cocoa crisis on Friday morning. That's at 11 o'clock on the Food Programme here on BBC Radio 4. Now to agricultural policy, which is my favourite thing, and I do appreciate that puts me into a small but select group of people. Though, as our reports this week, as we dive into the detail of England's post-Brexit approach, are demonstrating, this is a policy that really matters when it comes to both our food and our environment. Well, as you're probably aware, England's biggest scheme to support farmers to farm more environmentally, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, or SFI, has been controversial. It was abruptly suspended in March last year when it ran out of money. The new relaunched version gives 2 application windows, the first of which is currently open, and it's aimed at small farms and those who haven't been involved before. It's already allocated 75% of its budget. The second window, for larger farms and those renewing agreements, opens in September, and there is some concern that money will be tight and many farmers may miss out. Jonathan Hintz, who's an organic farmer near Shipston-on-Stour in Warwickshire, has an SFI agreement, but it runs out later this year. He's being helped to access schemes by the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, but as Bob Huckenhall discovered when he visited the farm, they want more clarity about the future of the scheme.
We've probably got about 80 acres of wildflower meadows, which are sort of at their peak at the moment. We do hedgerow restoration, laying, coppicing. We do low input cereal. We are fully organic. We do get an organic payment for the ground through the schemes, through the stewardship scheme. We're doing quite a lot of stuff through those schemes, which we wouldn't necessarily be able to do if we didn't get the funding to do it, because you're losing production, and that just helps to cushion that. I think the point is that the schemes need continuity.
Are you worried that you may not get a further SFI grant?
I am worried. I appreciate there's only so much in the pot to pay. I realise it has to be restricted, but it does make it very difficult, the uncertainty of not knowing what you can and can't do.
And if you didn't get an SFI grant, would you be able to carry on with some of the wildlife enhancements that you've mentioned?
We wouldn't go so far as to sort of plough up headlands and things like. We'd try and manage that really, but we just have to sit down and think how we're going to increase the cash flow with the SFI not there.
Ian Jelly is Director of Landscape Recovery with Warwickshire Wildlife Trust.
For us as the Wildlife Trust, it's not a choice between nature or food. They can go hand in hand, and Tymington Farm is a shining example of that.
What would be your message to the government in terms of allocating grants and helping the environment in the future?
The Wildlife Trust thinks the overall direction of travel for the environmental schemes is the right way to go. We obviously want to see it go faster and with a greater budget and to be more relevant to more farms. If you take a moment to think about, if you're listening to this at home, think about the business that you have. Imagine a situation where you are producing what you're doing for the entire year, but you're not sure whether there's going to be a market for that product at the end of it. Or you're reliant on funding, but you don't know whether that funding is going to come through until a very short window in which you've got to apply. That's not the conditions that any business needs to thrive. It's really difficult for cash flow. Farmers just want a fair representation and to be able to plan accordingly with their business. We understand that farming covers 70% of the UK land area, and so getting farming with nature right is critical to nature's recovery.
Ian Jelly. The poultry industry is calling for animal welfare and food production to be prioritised as pressure increases on water supplies. This follows the closure of a chicken processing site in Devon due to a lack of water. The Two Sisters company says its plant at Willand near Columpton has been forced into a critical situation, and South West Water's decision to restrict water supply to the factory has created what they're calling an urgent animal welfare issue. Well, South West Water says it's been forced into introducing restrictions during the heatwave, including a hosepipe ban in some areas of Devon and Dorset, that it recognises the importance of animal welfare and has been working with the company, but that it needs to prioritise private customers and human health, animal welfare and businesses in that order. Earlier this week, Sam Bottomley, South West Water's Director of Drinking Water Services, told John Akers at BBC Radio Devon that they had enough water, but with increased demand, they can't treat enough to keep up.
This isn't about a raw water drought position. So we're not in a risk at the moment of running out of raw water. What's happening is that the heat that we're seeing and the consumption is outstripping the capacity of our water treatment works, particularly the Alice treatment works in this particular area. So this is purely about our ability to be able to keep up with the high or record levels of consumption that we're seeing.
A chicken processor at Willand has told us it's seeing lower water pressure and reduced supply, which it says is creating animal welfare concerns and hitting the business as well. What can you do about that, Sam?
We're working closely with that business user. Unfortunately, we have got to reduce water supply to a lot of business users. You know, that one site in one day uses the same amount of water as over 2,000 people would use in a whole week. So we've got to prioritise, human consumption above businesses, and animal welfare, and then finally the business supply. So that's our sort of priorities that we work with. We have been working closely with the abattoir, and we've arranged for them to have water to be able to deal with their current stocks of animals that they're processing, and to be able to put their business continuity plan in place so they can process their animals in alternative sites for the rest of this week. They're going to have to suspend operations until we can get the supply back to them.
But isn't that going to cause a huge animal welfare issue?
No, the arrangements we've got in place with that particular company allows them to deal with the animals they've got on site, so that by Wednesday they'd be clear of animals on site and they'd be sent to other processing plants.
I mean, that's massive, having to stop. So will you be able to compensate that business?
We always look at opportunities for compensation, but also it's like a lot of businesses, if they've got a heavy reliance on, they're consuming 2 million litres of water a day, and we will work with that company about how we look at the robustness and the business continuity opportunities going forward as well. And we'll do that over the coming months.
Sam Bottomley there from South West Water. Two Sisters told us that the plant, which usually kills and processes hundreds of thousands of chickens a week, has now suspended operations. They say, we have already reduced our water consumption by almost 30%, and below this level we can't operate the site to the required food safety and animal health and welfare requirements. A spokesman told us that they are negotiating with South West Water for enough supply to carry on operations for 24 to 36 hours while they organise alternative arrangements, which is probably going to be shipping in water by road. They warned that the knock-on effects will be felt by retailers and add, we are in a situation that needs immediate and urgent action. Richard Griffiths, the Chief Executive of the British Poultry Council, says this is a completely avoidable situation.
We have to prioritise both the welfare of birds and food supply. We need to get to a place where that gets the priority access for water.
So that would mean that people would get less water in their homes and face perhaps an even bigger restriction than the hosepipe ban to make sure that food production went ahead. Is that fair?
There are obviously some difficult choices and difficult discussions within all of this. But yeah, we absolutely must prioritise the welfare of livestock.
The water company is very clear that it has given Two Sisters enough water this week to kill all the chickens that were already on site. And now the company has contingency plans to use other sites. So that's fair enough, isn't it?
We're hearing that birds are backing up on farm, that those alternatives are really not practical and should be avoided. The capacities of other plants, the distances of travel to other plants, that we're now having discussions about on-farm slaughter of birds because we can't process them. So this is a really serious situation, and the last thing we want is for this situation to be replicated at slaughterhouses and farms across the country, because we've heard rumblings from other water companies around the country of limitations of water supply. This cannot happen again. We're calling on government to bring in a prioritisation for welfare and food processing.
As we just heard, South West Water will point out that poultry uses a lot of water in this process, and that increases pressure on supply. Could the industry use less?
Part of our ethos is minimising the resources that we use. So right now, all plants are using as little as they possibly can, but they have to have a certain amount for hygienic production of food. And that is, we can only use potable water.
Doesn't this reveal the weakness in the food system, in this case in chicken, in this just-in-time sort of approach? Because it's a very streamlined system. The chickens arrive on farm, they grow, then they're taken off to be killed and processed on a particular date. So when there is a problem, then everything backs up on the farm. It causes real ructions because it's so streamlined.
That efficiency in the system, yes, that is absolutely the root of just-in-time. These issues do expose the sometimes fragility of the system. And this is part of a much broader discussion about future resilience of food systems and how we change from a just-in-time to have a just-in-case mentality as well, so that we can deal with climate change, we can deal with all the other issues that we're facing. But right now, we need a solution today, and then we're happy to talk about what tomorrow looks like.
You want a sort of different priority system when it comes to water, so that animal welfare and agriculture would come higher in the order. How likely do you think is that to happen?
It seems to be slow going at the moment. Ministers and DEFRA are working on it, but it is slow going, and it means that different parts of government have to talk to each other. And I hope that's happening, but we need an outcome sooner rather than later.
Richard Griffiths from the British Poultry Council. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.